State Auditor, Hector Balderas, has some words he wants to share with us. We have some questions for him, and let's see what we can do to get things sorted out here. So thank you very much for joining us.
Well, let me first off by thanking the association for being here. What an opportunity for me to get my worldview, my reason for running in public service at this real important, crucial time in America. And I don't take these opportunities very lightly, because I think that there are many similarities between the mission of your organization and the mission of your institutions, and the mission of why our campaign is gaining ground so quickly, with many challenges, the odds stacked against us, why we're actually gaining ground at such an alarming rate. You know, I primarily am running because I was raised in poverty in northern New Mexico, and raised in just about any public program available, whether it was food stamps, public housing, Medicare, but with a sense of optimism that my mother and my grandfather gave me. And what is very frustrating is that the American dream and that sense of hopelessness is really setting into my generation. And I think that we need leaders that can govern and lead in a way that instills that hope and optimism. Secondly, we're running on a very important mission of reform, that our economy is out of balance, and our policymakers have been somewhat misguided, not just last year, but for quite some time now, for quite some time in decades. And I think leveling the playing field is something that is a wonderful opportunity for the Credit Union Association, and many of the position of policy and concerns that you have really stem from the dysfunction or the double standard in getting capital to communities and protecting the tax status that is so vital to the investment of what our communities really need. My principles are simple: accountability, a better run government. Everyone right now is debating better government, but really very few have a real track record at the type of protection and reform that can truly get the federal government as an efficient partner. When you talk about smart, intelligent design, regulation, and regulatory constructs in the banking industry, you need someone who's going to fight hard for you, someone who will not turn the blind eye to the double standards. When you're talking about getting capital into communities, you're going to need someone who not just comes over here and pumps up a good game, but who is truly accountable to the communities that are being starved from capital, like small businesses in communities like Belen, communities like Wagon Mound, communities like Farmington and Hobbs. So we have a unique opportunity because of my biography and because of my regulatory reform background. I think it presents a wonderful opportunity for me to engage voters, but more importantly, seek partners like yourselves who've been on the front lines and who've been frustrated as well, sometimes by the congressional inaction, or sometimes the congressional action that results in not so much intelligently designed regulations that hamper the ability for you to do your job. I will tell you that I'm an underdog, and one of the reasons we are catching fire is because most of New Mexico right now feels like they're underdogs, and that the greatest moment in the history of this nation has been when we invest in underdogs. And so that message is really resonating with my voters and many of your members who right now feel that they need an underdog in the United States Senate, someone who understands their issues, but more importantly, someone who's willing to fight for those issues of vital importance. So thank you, and stand for questions. But again, I'm grateful at the opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. Thank you. Preguntas, as they say in Mora.
Are you a member of a credit union? Are you familiar with our philosophy?
Yes, I have three relationships. The first is growing up and going to law school. We opened our first accounts, savings accounts, with New Mexico educators. Secondly, the institution that's here that we're in, actually, you gave my wife her auto loan for the court. And
regulations. And starting in the late 90s, there's some regulations where we deregulated banks to a certain extent, Glass-Steagall and so on. Things came down. That helped lead up to what eventually became our economic meltdown a few years back. Dodd-Frank attempted, it was a grand gesture, trying to fix some things that needed to be fixed. Everybody said we need to regulate so this doesn't happen again. We still have really large banks. And it seems like if the smaller you get, the more complicated, the more difficult it is to continue to compete, if for another reason than just regulations. And then you get a couple thousand-page bill like Dodd-Frank, and trying to address that and deal with it can be done very complicated. If you're a medium to large-sized financial institution, if you're a small credit union, it's pretty tough and almost impossible. And we really need the small credit unions to take care of our members. How do you approach Dodd-Frank financial reform? Is it an ongoing process that's not done yet? Do we start over? How would you approach that particular situation?
Well, I've heard several critiques. One, that it was well-intentioned, and so from on the predatory side and the oversight side, I would quickly look to see if there is enough oversight when it kicks in. I understand that there's a delay effect on the oversight in the Dodd-Frank legislation. The other thing I'm suspect of is I'm worried that the banks right now are actually larger than they were in stature pre the fiscal crisis. And so immediately would begin to analyze that. One of the exciting things that I think that I'm going to implement as U.S. Senators is using the GAO as an investigative audit arm for my own analysis. And I think that would be one of the things that I would immediately request some additional type of outcomes from the Dodd-Frank Act. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is, at the end of the day, you would have an advocate that favors investing and loosening regulatory constraints on the credit unions. Because I think you've got a phenomenal track record. I think that the capital or lack of capital in communities really can be eased by supporting credit unions. And quite frankly, there has been what I've understood on outcomes. There's been very little change in the market when it comes to large financial institutions. So, as a U.S. Senator, I would think regulation in the financial sector would be one area that I'd probably spend a whole year just getting a better idea and making sure that the oversight that was intended truly gets implemented. And what I've understood to this day is that big banks are not lending. They're larger than they were, and there's probably a greater distrust of the financial sector at this point, unfortunately, because of the fiscal crisis.